So I'm so excited for this next panel, Transnational Feminist Perspectives on Survival, Solidarity, and Transformation. And I'm in particular excited that this is a panel moderated and organized by my beloved colleague, Manijeh Moradian, Manijeh Moradian, excuse me, I did that again, yeah. Who I've learned so much from, and I'm looking forward to learning more. Manijeh is Assistant Professor of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Barnard College. She's former co-director of the Association of Iranian American Writers, and her research focuses on political cultures of the Iranian diaspora in the US, tracing generational shifts in transnational activism and cultural production across the historical arc of US-Iran relations. Her magnificent book, This Flame Within, Iranian Revolutionaries in the United States from 2022, won the 2024 Hamid Nafisi Book Award for the best book in Iranian diaspora studies from the Association of Iranian Studies, and also received an honorable mention for the 2023 Middle East Studies Association Nikki Keddie Book Award. I am not going to say more about where all her articles have appeared and so on, but I will say two other things. Manijeh is one of the smartest and most ethical organizers I have ever encountered. Her political instincts are solid. They have incredible integrity, and she is absolutely brilliant about the need to be skeptical and fierce against forms of authoritarianism and imperialism at the same time. You're going to hear this, I'm sure, a lot in here. But I just think of you as a teacher that we all need for this moment. So thank you for doing this panel.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Beck, and thank you all for being here today. It's a hard time. And when I woke up this morning to the news, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so unprepared. How will I stand up and speak in front of all these people? And then I thought, I've been preparing for this my whole life, because this is the war that we've been waiting for, what the US has wanted for 47 years. And really, there's no place I'd rather be than here at a feminist conference with my comrades and my students. So some of this, much of this you already know, but I'm just going to say it because this is what's in my heart. The United States and Israel, they want to destroy any threat to their hegemony throughout the region. That is what this war is about. It is not about fighting terrorism. It is not about liberating women. It is not about paving the way for a people's revolution. We do see that there's no concept that the right cannot attempt to co-opt, however, because now Trump is literally saying, I'm doing this for the Iranian people, we're going to overthrow your government, and then now is your chance to make a revolution. I mean, it is so incredibly painful and enraging to hear that coming out of his mouth. Of course, the first reports of mass casualties reported are of a girls' school in southern Iran. This is what they do. This is what they do in Gaza. This is what they do in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Iran. And here in the United States, our job is to raise our voices against this war, in solidarity with everyone in the region and around the world who has been targeted by US imperialism. Our job is to do everything we can to bring this war to an end. That is my first point. But too often, on the anti-imperialist left in the United States and Europe, that's the end of the discussion. The lived experiences, material conditions, histories of struggle, and aspirations of ordinary Iranians are somehow sidelined or disregarded, and Iranians are only legible as victims of US bombs, and never as people who desperately want to change the course of history and who keep trying again and again. If we accept the binary oppositions of geopolitics, the cruel and unbearable choice between an ethno-nationalist authoritarian regime or being bombed into submission by foreign powers, we are participating in the silencing and in the foreclosure of other possible futures. Every single time Iranians have organized through their unions, through elections, through their student organizations, through civil society and women's organizations, and through mass street protests, they have been met with state violence. But what happened this past January was unprecedented. The Iranian government carried out a large-scale massacre under conditions of total internet blackout. We still do not know, we may never know the full numbers, but this was a turning point. No longer concerned about any semblance of legitimacy, the Iranian state is willing to use any amount of violence it deems necessary to stay in power. And of course, this is right out of the US and Israeli playbook. I mean, when genocide is normalized, mass death is the default logic that states can turn to over and over again with relative ease. Under conditions of multiple and sustained crisis, and if folks haven't seen it yet, there's a new essay collection on Jadalia.com, Iran in Crisis. I was able to co-edit with Ida Niku that has incredible essays talking about how did we get to this horrific moment, because it wasn't inevitable. But under conditions of multiple and sustained crises, when all roads to reform and structural change appear blocked, and with the relentless 24-hour pumping of pro-Israeli, pro-US, and pro-monarchy propaganda into Iranian households via satellite television stations located outside Iran, under these conditions, we have to reckon with the fact that many Iranians are welcoming this invasion. They have reached the point where they are willing to believe that anything is better than the unbearable conditions they face in Iran. Now, not all Iranians think this way, of course. It's 90 million people. It's a heterogeneous society. There are anti-war voices inside Iran, and we need to listen to them. And one thing that these anti-war voices inside Iran have been saying for a long time, sorry, my notes somehow are all scrambled now, is that it's not enough only to condemn. My goodness, it's not enough only to condemn US and Israeli war, that we have to condemn the war the Islamic Republic has been waging on its own people. That if we don't stand in solidarity with Iranian popular struggles for freedom, democracy, women's rights, then we leave a political vacuum that the right wing has filled. And that is the tragic situation that we're in right now. Sorry, give me 1 second to figure out where I am. Okay. And this is why we need transnational feminism. Transnational feminism offers a deep conceptual, analytical, and political repertoire from which we can reject the choice between one form of military violence over another, to reject the false choice between national sovereignty and bodily sovereignty, to reckon with the disastrous world wrought by empire, but also by the brutalities of post-colonial nation states that have pursued voracious neoliberal forms of accumulation and ecological destruction at the expense of the majority of the population, that have enforced second-class citizenship for women, ethnic and religious minorities, criminalized queer people, and enforced state control over women's bodies with systematic violence. Iranians have risen up over and over again, have tried everything from, as I said, reform, to innovating a feminist revolutionary idiom that led to a mass uprising in the name of women, life, freedom. And this Kurdish slogan helped to reclaim that corrupted concept of revolution from a tool of the regime that the regime uses to bludgeon dissenters as counter-revolutionary, helped to reclaim that concept of revolution into something that could offer an alternative future for Iran, an Iran that is neither an Islamic Republic nor a client state of the West. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead. because I've really lost my notes, are completely scrambled, sorry. Like many things right now. There are no page numbers, so I'm totally lost. Okay. Transnational feminism, in its rejection of all forms of oppression, in its analysis of multiple forms of patriarchal state violence and long-standing opposition to post-colonial nationalism as well as imperialism, is our intellectual arsenal. Our job is to continue to insist against all odds that we will never accept subjugation, not in the name of the false promises of imperial saviorism, and not in the name of a hollowed-out anti-imperialism severed from any notion of justice. Transnational feminism can help us reframe what is happening in Iran, away from ridiculous right-wing narratives about a clash of civilizations or fighting terrorism versus fighting imperialism, which is what the Iranian state claims. It is our job to make the connections across our different and uneven sites of struggle, the connections between the fight to end prisons, to end the death penalty, the fight for women to control our own bodies, the fight for gender and sexual liberation, and the fight to stop the profit-driven destruction of our planet. These are the same struggles Iranian people are fighting for. They're not some disconnected, Iran is like siphoned off from the rest of the world. We go to protests and we have a cartography of liberation that we chant, from Palestine to Venezuela to this place and that, but Iran is never part of it. It's never there. It's completely removed, even though people there are fighting for the same things, for a livable future, to be free of militarism and state violence. If some Iranians are cheering for this war, that has more to do with their own despair at trying over and over and over again and failing to change their circumstances on their own terms. It has as much to do with that, maybe more to do with that, than the influence of right-wing propaganda. And while I don't believe that the flawed slogans of the left have much impact on what Trump or Netanyahu are doing, they do impact the political alternatives that can develop on the ground in Iran. If people feel isolated, like there's no alternative to foreign bombs, that no one has their back, that whatever left exists in the world, it's not for them, right? If people feel that, it means we've failed to build an internationalist feminist alternative that can be responsive to conditions on the ground and build real solidarity across borders. And in this moment of chaos and bombs and ideological utter disarray, this is still the task ahead of us. And that's why I'm so happy that we're all here today and that we have this panel and this group of scholars in particular, who I will introduce in a moment. But join me in welcoming them, please. I couldn't have asked for a more brilliant group of comrade scholars to think with and be with today. And so I'll just introduce them briefly. As you know, the full bios are in the program. Our first speaker is going to be Sameh, who is Associate Professor of Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of California, Irvine. And she's the author of Axis of Hope, Iranian Women's Rights Activism Across Borders, published in 2019, which examines the discourses, practices, methods, organizational cultures, and transnational networks of Iranian women's rights activists in Iran and in the United States. And very significantly for us, this is also something of a homecoming for her, because before joining UC Irvine, she was the Associate Director of BCRW and Managing Editor of the Scholar and Feminist Online. So welcome home, Catherine. Our next speaker will be Evren Savci, Assistant Professor of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Yale University. Her first book, Queer in Translation, Sexual Politics Under Neoliberal Islam, was published in 2021 and analyzes sexual politics under contemporary Turkey's AKP regime with an eye to the travel and translation of sexual political vocabulary. Her second book project, Monogamy and Its Discontents, turns to the political economy of monogamy through an investigation of two of its alternatives, polygamy and polyamory in contemporary Turkey. So delighted to have you with us. Zahra Ali is a writer, a feminist, an associate professor of sociology at Rutgers University, Newark, and the founder of Critical Studies of Iraq, Her first book, Women and Gender in Iraq, was published in, the year isn't there, sorry. Her first book is called Women and Gender in Iraq, and do we have it for sale here? Yes, we do. And she's actually been working on the ground with people in Iraq, and maybe she'll talk about this incredible women's conference that she did. I'm not sure if you're going to talk about that. But she is interested in racial capitalism, post-coloniality, decolonial theory, and transnational feminism. And she's actually we have a BCRW-sponsored research group together with several other people called Transnational Feminism in a Time of Genocide. Our next speaker will be Saed Atshan, Associate Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies and Anthropology at Swarthmore College. He's the author of Queer Palestine and the Empire of Critique, published in 2020, and co-author of The Moral Triangle, Germans, Israelis, Palestinians. It came out also in 2020. And several other books that I'm not going to read, including the forthcoming In a Land of Aid, Essays on the Palestinian Condition. Thank you so much for being here, Saed. And finally, I'm really so happy that my dear beloved colleague here at WGSS, Neferti Tadiar, is also on the panel. She's professor of WGSS here and author of several award-winning books. I will not read everything, but the most recent one is Remaindered Life, published in 2022, a meditation on the disposability and surplus of life-making under contemporary conditions of the global empire of capital, which was awarded the John Hope Franklin Prize for Best Book in American Studies in 2023. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Catherine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to Beck and Margot and Pam and Hope and everyone at BCRW for organizing this amazing conference. I do know firsthand how much labor these events require, and as is the way of BCRW, the conference has been stellar so far and also so beautiful. Everything that BCRW produces is beautiful, which is one of our demands for the revolution, for things to be beautiful. Thank you also to my sister, my comrade, my friend, my colleague, Manijeh, for organizing this panel and for your consistently brilliant and illuminating contributions to transnational feminist thought. And if you haven't read the Jadaliyya dossier, it's amazing. So please read it. We need it now. I will try not to sob when I say that this is a beautiful homecoming for me. I've been fortunate over the course of many decades, which seem to just keep piling up, to work in several wonderful feminist workplaces. I was a feminist healthcare worker and a feminist bookstore worker, and now I'm in a wonderful GSS department at UC Irvine. But without a doubt, my time at BCRW, working with Janet Jacobson, Elizabeth Castelli, Pam Phillips, Hope Dector, Ann Jonas, and Nietzsche Yin, and I want to add co-workers, Christina Crosby and Moxie, as well as the many amazing faculty here, so many of whom I've seen, and it's been just so beautiful and wonderful to see you all. Without a doubt, my time here was and will always be the icing on the cake. To work side by side, think together, dream, make plans, produce events, write, talk and produce knowledge and parties and fun collectively, to eat together, to laugh, to love and care about each other. There's nothing better. So when I got to UC Irvine, I was used to we'll meet as a group, and then a few of us will meet about this, and a few of us will meet about that. And I was like, okay, so when are we meeting? Are we having meetings? I love meetings. And my colleagues were like, we don't love meetings, please calm down. So that's okay. But we did establish something called the Angry Feminist Happy Hour. So I think that's something that we can reproduce over and over again. So I'm going to pivot a little bit from Iran, and then I'll come back to Iran. But in 2010, I was hired and so lucky to become the associate director of BCRW. and to create a transnational feminisms initiative that would respond to the desire among faculty on the advisory board who had already been thinking and working around transnational feminism, but to come together with each other across disciplines, regions, methods, contexts, pedagogies, and contribute to the field that had been growing for a couple of decades with their scholarship and contribution. So to kind of cohere a line of collective work that has become one of the threads of BCRW. We wanted the project to build on BCRW's signature method. Right? I've been thinking so much about there's a BCRW method. It can be reproduced in other places. Let's reproduce it. Of joining scholarship and activism together and to connect the work of Barnard faculty and students with feminist scholars and activists around the world. Now, this was a moment when global education was circulating as a key term in the academy, and we sought to interrogate this term, confront the difficulties and dilemmas, and there are so many, as Manijeh has laid out, of doing transnational feminist work, acknowledge and critically examine the ways in which our participation in such work as an elite U.S. institution might reinforce relations of power, but nonetheless try to do something to bring scholarship and activism together in such a way that genuine, long-term, and mutual collaborations might be established. So this is also a period where we thought at the time anyway that this was sort of the height of global, AKA imperial feminism. And so one of the other things, I'm just going to mention a couple things we did in the early years of the initiative. And this is another kind of key term I think that's part of the BCRW method, which is to hack things. Hack space, hack structures, and make them our own. So we hacked BCRW's Global Symposium, which was, a little bit in the vein of perhaps a kind of global imperialist feminism. We hacked that, and we recruited Yvette Christianse from Africana Studies, Women's and Gender Sexuality Studies, and English Literature, the effervescent Yvette, and the amazing and wonderful Shayoni Mitra from the Department of Theater as the first BCRW Transnational Feminisms Initiative faculty fellows. And together we organized the first two transnational seminars. Mumbai at Home and in the World, Gender, Sexuality, and the Post-Colonial City in January 2013, and Gender and Sexuality in Contemporary African Contexts in July and August 2013. So we tried to, this is before Zoom, create a collective syllabi and bring students together. So in Mumbai, faculty and students from Barnard, Sophia College in Mumbai, and Lady Shri Ram College in Delhi explored questions of gender, class, caste, and public space in global cities like Mumbai and New York. In Cape Town, students and faculty from Barnard, the African Gender Institute, and Rutgers University considered the politics of gender and sexuality in contemporary South Africa, feminist and queer activism, and Cape Town's relation to regional and historical struggles. And in both places, we met with activists and community leaders involved in feminist, queer, decolonial, and anti-imperialist struggles. And I think about those trips a lot because they also kind of hacked the study abroad model, and we're really trying to, be together in a space, which I think is really critical to these projects. So there are many other examples of things that we did, but I wanted to, and of course, the project has grown and developed in the last 12 years under Tammy Navarro, Miriam Neptune, and many, many others. But I wanted to highlight one more event from the earlier period. We organized, along with Atiya Ahmad from George Washington University, the 2014 Scholar and Feminist Conference around the 20th anniversary of the 1994 publication of Scattered Hegemonies, Postmodernity and Transnational Feminist Practices. And the conference was a moment to reflect on the foundational work of this text, to honor the amazing feminist scholars Inderpal Grewal and Karen Kaplan and their collaborators, and examine the ongoing formation of the field that anthology helped to launch. We brought together a group of junior scholars working across disciplines and regions with the pioneers of the field, to explore how their work on transnational feminisms could help analyze and respond to recent global transformations. At that time, sort of the aftermath of the Arab Spring, the Occupy movements, and other widespread protests aimed at transforming existing systems of national, regional, and institutional governance. As many participants in that conference articulated, and as Manijeh has articulated, transnational feminism is an intervention, right, into the world, both politically and intellectually, often in moments of crises and enclosure, as was, for example, the statement, Transnational Feminist Practices Against War, which you need to recirculate, build on, add to, continue to talk about, written by Graywell and Kaplan, along with Paolo Bacchetta, Tina Kampt, Binu Muallim, and Jennifer Terry, written in the aftermath of September 11th, 2001. And the statement considers, among other things, the gendered and racialized effects of nationalism, the deployment of colonial tropes and binaries and gender dichotomies, and the possibilities for transnational movements to challenge war, global capitalism, state violence, and distinct yet connected, deeply connected patriarchal authoritarianisms. Oops. In my work, I've tried to think with these transnational feminist frameworks, methods, and practices to, one, challenge the binaries that have overdetermined discussions of Iran, particularly in relationship to the US, and undermine the possibilities for transnational solidarity for the last 40-plus years. East versus West, secular versus religious, totalitarian versus democratic, rights-needing versus rights-bearing. And to think with, which I think is another key term of the method of BCRW and the method of transnational feminist practices, to think with the many decades of women's experience and robust feminist thought emerging, not externally, but from within Iran, people, human beings, creating practices and ideas to challenge a larger geopolitical framework that says there are only two options, right? Two options, be silent about any other alternatives. One, punish Iran through sanctions, isolation, war. Or two, turn away from, stay silent on state repression and defend the state as a bulwark against American-Israeli aggression. And I was thinking about feminist protectionism and also feminist complicity. So there are feminists who inhabit both of these positions, and I think that's another term. One more minute, okay. Yeeks. Okay, so there have been so many moments over the last 40 years where Iranian feminists and activists have offered an alternative politics, one that sees their sovereignty as part of the program of national self-determination. And they have challenged, they've held together this complexity. This is a moment where we're going to be told that we can't think complexly, that you have to choose sides. We have to resist that. They have seen their work in relation to other feminist work around the world in the heat of 2022 at the Women Life Freedom Movement, and I want to say that Sophie Lewis's dream of a revolution led by girls and women came true for a moment in 2022. We need to learn from that moment, revisit that moment. That was also a moment where the kind of transnational feminist solidarity emerged as feminists and scholars from Sudan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkey, India, Yemen, the Philippines saw the struggle of Iranian women, girls, and all of the people that they enveloped in that movement as their own, okay? And this, too, is one of the practices of transnational feminism, to see one's struggle as one's own. It's an ethos, a method, and a practice that works against the twin problems of exceptionalizing and universalizing. So we need to see, I'll end there, we need to see these struggles as our own. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I want to also thank Manijeh for organizing this panel and bringing us together, and also to Beck and Margot and everyone else at BCRW for this amazing conference. It's truly an honor to be here, to be sharing the space and this couple of days with you. I'm very sad, I'm very angry, and I'm also very happy to be here with you, just like Manijeh. I also want to quickly thank Beck for the shout out to the slogan Neredesin Aşkım. This is something I've written about a little bit in my first book as a queer organizing sentiment that became really kind of vernacular in a much more mass way. And in my new book, I think about love as a commons that's been enclosed mostly by the form of monogamy, and how love can be itself a political force through the Turkish queer slogan, Aşk örgütlenmektir, which means to love is to organize. But I am here to talk to you about something else today. In a small workshop that I organized with a few colleagues over a year ago, themed Gender, Sexuality, and Human Rights, a US-American scholar asked a seasoned feminist colleague and organizer from Brazil how her relationship to the concept of human rights had changed over time, and how she had arrived at her current position. I want to note that this was mostly a question of curiosity, formulated by a colleague who was grappling with the feminist critiques of human rights on one hand as a framework, and the authoritarian governments increasingly closing down on gendered and sexual minorities on the other. Sonia responded, I started doing human rights work when we were protesting the dictatorship in Brazil. A little later, during the conversation, she remarked upon how everyone now mistakenly remembered the Beijing conference as white and at times as governmental feminism. The African delegation was huge, she added. So was the Asian delegation. She recounted feminists from Eastern Europe traveling all the way to Beijing via train, picking up feminists in different countries along the way. I open my remarks with this story because I find that it gets at the heart of some of the tensions in transnational feminist organizing and a US-led academic theory and scholarship on feminism. The first moment alludes to a time and place when the primary conceptual work of human rights was anti-militarism and anti-authoritarianism. The second moment to a time and place when the ability to physically gather made overgeneralized statements and any attendant dismissals of any feminist organizing difficult. They point to complicated meanings and usefulness of certain frameworks for transnational feminist organizing versus their critique and at times dismissal in the academy, or maybe I should say abandoning. To the erasure of the complex and messy histories of movements and what can get lost in abstraction, but also to the dangers of analytical and conceptual work being perceived as lofty and disconnected from real struggles of everyday people. Take the slogan of the Iranian feminist mobilization following the murder of 22-year-old Mahsa Jina Amini, now reverberating all over the Middle East and, in fact, the world. Jin, Jiyan, Azadi. Woman, life, freedom. 3 words, each of which have become difficult to use in US feminist and queer studies context without being labeled liberal. Women, life, freedom. Transnational feminists have for a long time insisted that we do not exempt the post-colonial geographies from our critique, that hegemonies are scattered, and that there is a political and capitalist elite all over the world who are complicit in crafting unlivable conditions for the majority of the world's inhabitants. Yet life came to be understood as something that is imbued with normative reproductive investments, and freedom an illusion, the product of a naivete only the privileged can afford. We owe the skepticism around freedom to both Marx and Foucault, I think, but Marx did not foreclose struggle as a meaningful commitment the way Foucault did, or the way much of queer theory has read Foucault did. Women, not all in all, but most US feminist and queer studies context today marks a category automatically oppressive in its binary nature. Yet earlier feminist and queer studies scholars like Chandra Mohanty and Judith Butler wanted us to see what kinds of imbrications the category woman had with colonialism, neocolonialism, and the heterosexual matrix. Getting rid of the category does not get rid of the systems that produce and reproduce it. All it does is confusing the critique of the symptom with the critique of the structure. These are the kinds of things that are on my mind these days, a form of feminist reckoning I imagine many of us are engaged in. Where we have spent our energies in the last 20, 30 years, and how we ended up in this moment. I find myself thinking we could have been involved more with and learned more from transnational feminist, queer, and trans organizing and analysis. That the critique of saviorism could have been accompanied by plans for better transnational solidarities instead of shying away from them or declaring transnational solidarity across power asymmetries and impossibility. Guilt has replaced politics for some, and for others, a good theoretical beating of white feminism has been enough. How to shift gears to exit from this dead end and try something else? I find that while imperfect, transnational feminist movements today are providing us with important models despite the historical and ongoing attacks they have been facing and ongoing internal conflicts they have been weathering. The March 8th International Women's Day in Istanbul, I also should thank for a shout out today because I still find it remarkable that this day means close to nothing in the United States of America when it's a big deal in the rest of the world. So the March 8th International Women's Day in Istanbul is the only time in the year a mass radical gathering happens still in Taksim Square. Taksim is a large square in the city center that used to be the site of all mass gathering and protests. And since the bloody May 1st of 1977, where fascists opened fire onto masses and killed and injured many, many people, no May 1st protest has been allowed to take place there. And since 2015, LGBT and trans pride marches have also been banned from Taksim. While March 8th does not have an official permit, a very large group manages to assemble on Istiklal leading to Taksim, often kicking down police barricades to march. This march is not organized without tensions, and historically has featured conflicts between trans feminists and more old-school feminists, or those who do not want cis men in the march and those who disagree with such exclusions. But no one has given up on this space as a result. No one has written feminism or this particular march off wholesale. And I think this is the important lesson, not giving up on our spaces and instead treating them as sites of ideological struggle. This position stands in stark opposition to what we have come to call purity politics, the expectation that people or movements or even universities are either politically and ethically flawless or we don't want to have anything to do with them. I'm not sure when we have come to accept that institutions such as universities deliver all we want. When have they delivered all we want? That still does not mean that we don't fight and struggle and demand more. In last year's Duke Feminist Theory Conference, someone asked the closing panel whether we should seek places for feminist theory outside of the university, now that the universities were proving to disappointingly collaborate with the government. To which Rebecca Wanzer responded, "We don't concede nothing." As someone who has moved halfway across the world in order to study feminist and queer studies in this country, because despite its imperfections, this was the most exciting place to engage with feminist and queer thought at the time, it baffles me to hear how quickly people can abandon spaces that were won after hard-fought battles, and I feel relieved when I hear feminist colleagues and comrades state that they will not concede. If I were to bring one thing from transnational feminist and queer movements and organizing to our discussion, that is the refusal to concede, and the refusal to confuse surrenderist and defeatist politics with radicalism or abolitionism. Coming from a context where we concede nothing is the spirit of the general feminist and queer organizing, where struggles are assumed to be ongoing and never over, even in moments of relative calm, it is harder for me to allow the meanings of categories movements, or even some institutions to become reified and divide us. Therefore, this is a useful approach not only when it comes to our spaces of organizing and gathering, but also when it comes to concepts that have been and continue to be helpful to some people somewhere in the world. And when we surrender these concepts, the right hegemonizes them immediately. That's another reason not to surrender them. In other words, both institutions such as universities and concepts such as human rights or women can be considered sites of ideological and material struggle. I'm excited to be in the struggle with you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I want to start with saying that there are moments in one's life when we feel that we are running out of words. In the past 2 years, many of us have used the term genocide almost obsessively, while knowing that what is happening in Gaza is beyond that. It is beyond words. What are words after all? Just sounds, fragments of our feelings, of our limitations. In the past 2 years, I have had many moments of nihilism, of paralysis. I could not write, I could not think. I felt, just the way Laila ended her talk yesterday, that everything has been said. Is there anything left to say? Feelings are a form of knowledge. Knowing is a feeling. This feeling, this reaction was not coming out of nowhere. It was the result of having spent my entire adult life organizing, researching, writing, thinking in, from, and about Iraq, about the impact of the US-led invasion and occupation on Iraq and on Iraqis, about feminist and social movements in Iraq. Where did all the words go? 23 years into their war of terror, 4.5 million people killed and maimed, 38 million displaced in the entire region. And yet, Americans still say 9/11, never forget. In the past 2 decades, none of the architects of this incommensurable devastation and suffering, no one was ever taken in front of a court. Most of the people who are directly responsible for the apocalypse in Iraq are living comfortable lives. Bush himself has been rehabilitated. Today, when Iraq is talked about, if at all, it is talked about as a thing that happened. Even on the good side, the anti-war side, I often hear in this country what we did to Iraq. While this we could be heard as people taking responsibility for their government, I have always felt that it also carries entitlement, narcissism. What I hear as an Iraqi is, we are the center of your story. Iraqis are just the backdrop of the American story, the American soldier trauma story, the American sniper. I do sometimes, since I came into this country, think about the fact that more than 2 million Americans have set a foot in the land of the two rivers, one of the biggest military deployments in recent history. And I often wonder if their homes still carry traces of our world, small specks of Iraqi dust. Dust can travel, it does not know borders. So allow me for a moment to be suspicious of solidarity. On the left, Iraq has become a buzzword to talk about US imperialism, US foreign policy. Iraqis, our social movement, our feminist movement, our uprisings, our everyday life, us as people, evaporate in a political standpoint that is more interested in clearing its conscience, making sure it is on the side of the good guys, making sure it stays the center of the story, its analyst, its theorist. We have seen this a lot in the past 2 years, even in the so-called progressive spaces, where Palestinians, Arabs, are not to be trusted to talk about what is happening to them, about resistance, to explain what this means, what it does, even as more than 2 million Palestinians are being bombed and starved, as the American-Israeli genocidal violence is happening live in front of the world. Even then, the Israeli, the white Jewish intellectual, is still given precedence. It is still the white European story that is told as the premise of all of this. In the past 5 years, I've worked on an initiative called Critical Studies of Iraq, with a network of feminist activists and scholars, sociologists and anthropologists in Iraq, in Baghdad in particular. And we have been thinking of what it means to take Iraq as a framework, not as a case study, to theorize from and not only about. In the hegemonic global academy, where feminist questions such as what is theory for, whose interest does it serve, is never on anyone's mind. Iraq has been theorized from outside of its borders, from the metropolitan powers that have played a central role in destroying the very possibility, political, structural, and infrastructural, of the very existence of a free and functioning Iraqi intellectual life. We are reflecting on what theory would look like if we were to decide of what we want to theorize about and how we want to go about it. Here in the US, during these moments of speechlessness and paralysis, have also met amazing people, people like Manijeh, people like the people in this panel, and we gathered with others to talk about what transnational feminism mean and look like in times of fascism and genocide. So now, as US and Israeli bombs are falling on the people of Iran, allow me to believe in transnational feminist solidarity. Transnational feminist thinking and activism feels so urgent, the necessity to connect the dots, to make the connection between spaces, places, people, to break with this idea of a here and a far away there that structures the mind of people in this empire, to insist on the fact that we live in one world structured by systems of power, racial, colonial, heteropatriarchal, capitalist, and that some, mostly but not strictly, in the global north benefit from this system, and some are victims of it, oppressed by it. It means that some live at the expense of others through their exploitation and oppression. It means that Gaza, Palestine, Iraq, and Afghanistan, just like Vietnam, are present in the everyday lives of people in the US, in its military-industrial complex, in its normalization of police violence, and its anti-Black, anti-immigration racism, and its neo-colonial white feminism, and so many other aspects of its social, economic, and political life. All the important debates about racial reckoning have to be articulated with imperial reckoning. Transnational feminist thinking should allow us to have a serious analysis on the relationship between racism, imperialism, and settler colonialism. It implies the necessity to decenter US narrative, US centrism, and center the subjectivities, experiences, trajectories of those on the other side of the empire. It implies understanding empire as structure, not simply as the agency of criminal nation state or a political actor. It means to interrogate again and again and again the subject of feminism, to think seriously about what gender and what violence mean, specifically when thinking through Iraq and Palestine, when we know that Iraqi men, Palestinian men are not considered civilians, humans. The white colonial militaristic framework of depicting our men as perpetrators of violence by default. During the invasion and occupation of Iraq, Iraqi men were considered by the US Army as fighters by default. But in Iraq, there was at least, let's say, the woman and children narrative at play. In Gaza, where most of the victims are women and children, we see that even the very problematic women and children category does not even stand. So our insistence on the trans in the term transnational is, of course, a refusal of this international that essentializes and homogenizes categories such as nation and women. It means to refuse the capitalist white middle class woman of the world. Trans also means transcending borders of nation, gender, and sexuality. It means today, in particular, as it's been said, challenging simplistic and binary anti-imperialist slogans and agenda. Because in moments of struggle, like this moment, how tempting it is to simplify where we stand, who we are. Understanding empire as structure also means that we can see how, in a context such as Iraq and Iran, the anti-colonial language has been the language of political repression. The anti-feminist, the anti-gender backlashes in Iraq and our region are done in the name of anti-Western imperialism and anti-Zionism. Fascism in our context is part of this structure, but it also carries its own logic, its own structure. So I want to think of a world where we are truly connected and in which the integrity of the body, its freedom, its dignity, and the possibility to live a dignified life with all the structural and infrastructural dimension that it requires are at the center of our political and theoretical imagination. This means trying to connect the intimate, the personal, the political, the structural, the local, and the global all together. It means doing justice to the multiple dynamics at play, being able to articulate and hold several levels of critique all together. Comparing, but without equating. It is absolutely essential for us feminists to build transnational, to continue building transnational spaces where we can collectively imagine the world we want to live in, not only the one that we are standing against. Finally, I want to say that for me, feminist knowledge making, as opposed to knowledge production, and activism has been about learning how to mourn, to commemorate, to remember, as we are trying to build emancipatory future. I feel it today, so much thinking about people in Iran, and also during this month of Ramadan, a month dedicated to breaking with the frames that shape our existence, interrupt them, transcending time and space, also thinking of Gaza, Congo, Haiti, Sudan. I invite us to break with the mode of academia and end with these two verses of an old Arab melody recited in the Iraqi dialect that expresses the desire for peace and the fear of being forgotten because of distance. خذ يا نسيم السحر مني سلام لهم واحكي لهم حالتي وباللطف عاتبهم ما رضيت منهم بدل ما سمعت عاذلهم ليكون بعدي أنا يصير السبب ينسون. Thank you.
I want to first thank Beck and Margot and all the amazing BCRW team who have organized this conference. It's been truly awe-inspiring to see how you have met this very challenging moment, particularly here at Barnard, with the combined force of political fortitude and care. I also want to thank the stellar and stalwart comrade feminists who composed WGSS. Janet, Elizabeth, Beck, Manijeh, Marissa, you all make an intellectual home that can also be a driving visionary force of unsettlement and transformation. Thank you to all our students who give us reason to remain and hope for the future. And thank you to all the brave students of over the last 2.5 years, so many of them from Barnard, who, for their no small part in the resurgence of an anti-settler, colonialist, anti-imperialist, and anti-capitalist movement for our times, where the liberation of Palestine, Sudan, Congo, Iran, Iraq, the Philippines is key. And I want to thank Manijeh Moradian, of course, for the indefatigable and anti-imperialist feminist spirit and energy she brings to so many spaces. Like Nick Mitchell, I'm nervous today, but so I ended up not with a love letter, but with a rant. Today, the US and Israel launched yet another war, this time a war on Iran. I would never say we are at war to mean the US imperial state's actions. As a Filipina from the Philippines, the target and place of more than a century of unending US wars against the peoples I belong to, I am all too aware of what it means for those wars to be waged against us. The we that I am committed to being a part of, a we that cannot remain within the bounds of what the imperial wars target, the objects they inscribe with their weapons of punitive violence and mass destruction. In 2001, when the US began its shock and awe military bombing campaign against Afghanistan, I first cited the 1990 poem of the Filipina writer Joy Barrios, "Ang pagiging babae ay pamumuhay sa panahon ng digma." It means to be a woman is to live in a time of war, or more closely translated, becoming woman is a living in a time of war, which suggests that becoming woman is a form of work, of surviving and making a living against the ever-present threat and reality of assault, violation, pain, and wounding, but also, as she concludes, is a never-ending struggle to live and be free. Over and over again, I have turned to this poem to propose that the unspoken object of the declared war, global war on terror, could be thought of in terms of the becoming human. Descendants of the colonized worldwide who struggles to live and be free, struggles of decolonization and liberation for decades and for generations, constituted the real crisis that this revanchist war to be human was an attempt to vanquish. Since that launch of the global war on terror, which has lasted more than 25 years beyond its formal end and has resulted in the deaths of an estimated at least 4.6 million in the war zones of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, I have asked what it means to live in a time of war. And my effort to answer this question is the subject of my book, Remaindered Life. Here today, in response to the prompt given to us, I want to share just a few things I have learned, which I hope in its broadest outlines might resound with their significance in this moment. The war to be human is a global enterprise of punishment. Our peoples have always rebelled. They have organized and engaged in revolutionary wars of resistance, built anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, liberatory places and attachments of life-making, created and maintained alternative social bonds and cooperative webs of relations supporting shared life. And we have always been punished for our rebellions, for our big and small, declared and undeclared social exercises of rage, dissent, disobedience, and independence. Imperial wars have always served as a mode of punishment of resistance and rebellion of the colonized. But today, punishment serves not only as a form of direct and daily value extraction, as demonstrated by the US criminal justice system, but also as a force of production of permanently liquid and liquefiable populations, a financialized global enterprise with enormous gains for Western powers and a global capitalist class, as most grossly demonstrated in the genocidal dispossession of Palestinians in Gaza and in the occupied territories. Late imperialism is the war for the expanded reproduction of capital over all life. Imperial war is certainly a project of expansion of dominion and control, but it has always been a structural component of global capitalism, a project of dispossession that creates the enabling milieus of capitalist exploitation. Imperialism produces the disposability of all earthly life and things that through violence it codes as less than or not properly human. Imperial war is the means of stealing land and life, cheapening life, discounting entire populations, rendering them into raw material, resource, menial labor, instruments of capitalist production, as Aimé Césaire had said. It is the leveraging of violence over the hopes and dreams of people to impose the laws of capitalist value, its ontology and relationality, its imperial Christian morality and abstract humanist idealism, its Islamophobic secularism and deep contempt for animist and non-monotheistic faith, in order to free land for speculative urban and infrastructural development, to create surplus populations for its own use, to create the conditions for the very capitalization of reproduction and circulation, those arenas of living that were once outside of value productive manufacture, including the very work of survival itself. What are the gender and sexual politics of this war? Imperial war is the process and enjoyment of degradation, denigration, making black, the stripping of others into non-value, the making of life into absolute or relative waste, the stripping of independent worth and sacred being, inscribing flesh with the racializing stains of defeat, loss, lack, and debasement, the elimination, erasure, annihilation of all life prior to the supreme life of capital and its white and whitened bearers, the scorching of native earths, indigenous lands, what it deems unnatural homes and ways of life. Imperial war is a way to separate out, hive off places and peoples of abundant, free, and therefore worthless nature, to create, maintain, manage, and in today's financialized global economy, sell and traffic, to be the arbitrators of entire national territories of captive life. And that is the role of post-colonial states like the Philippines of Duterte and the Marcoses. How do they do this? Through currency controls, domestic counterinsurgency policing wars, to make the nation of human and more than human wealth, of capacities into literal collateral for monetized future lifetimes that underwrite a booming credit economy that cashes in all of our futures. This is the project of securing those spheres of what capitalist accumulation designates and depends on as mere reproduction, spheres of unremunerated, devalued, and assaulted shared life-making, paradoxically preserved and destroyed, segregated and assaulted, to serve as engines of production of the disposable life that fuels, motors, and enhances and upholds the protected lives of value of citizens and capital. All this is accomplished through sexual and racial codes of division, exclusion, and segregation. Sex and race in their organization of practice and relation lie at the crux of imperial power and its abiding role in the reproduction and maintenance of global capital. These are at the soulless core of global capitalist power and wealth, the deep unconscious of fascist sociality and sexuality revealed in the Epstein files. The flesh of billions made into fossil fuels for the rockets, fighter planes, missiles, M16s of their self-imaginations, the trophy toys of pugnacious men and women riding their technologies of mass destruction like conquistador horses on the desert plains of rubble they have just made, of the countless lives they have destroyed. It is the active and practice and pleasure of alienation, a process experienced in their self-imaginations as subjects of the finance capital class, as setting themselves apart from the merely or lesser humans they so despise. In this way, they perform the very dynamics of imperialist violence for the making of merely a reproductive, worthless life on which the accumulation and supreme capital of value is founded. The extreme violence of the American vernacular of fucking and fucking over is associated with, in the context of imperial war, the contempt for those most defined into a despised, free and abundant nature, inextricable from the gross enjoyment of sovereign power and dominion over them, the pleasure of absolute impunity in having one's way with others, those lesser beings whose manipulability and vulnerability is the very consequence of repeated violence. These all bear the cultural DNA of slave masters and conquerors coursing through imperial power and financial capital. Their bearers ruling over, ordering, building, destroying entire worlds with regard only to their own visions and pleasures, unchecked by the cries of those whose lives they trod on and waste for the good of the higher, which they embody. They are the law, divinity, transcendent and omnipotent power. Imperialism is the force of destruction that enables the immiserative power of capital, and yet it proffers capitalist tenets of value as the promise of our redemption. What are the possibilities of collective transformation, if not what our peoples have always known and have always done? Engaged in cooperative practices of shared survival and life-making that have always surpassed the limits of what colonial racism has enshrined as human. Practices whose yield of uncapitalizable splendors, grace and trill notes, glimmering joys, and profound love are the stuff of stardust in the tendrils of our ever-dynamic social tissue, in the ignoble, besmirched, yet precious beings and happenings, other lifetimes of our own tender regard, from which we could never be removed, that we cannot live or thrive without. What does it mean for we, the becoming human, to live in a time of war? It means intensifying our efforts to live in another time now, to live these other times of freeing and living, to be free. Thank you.
Wow, I'm just blown away by all of this, the ranting, the singing, the brilliance, the speaking truth to power. So I think we'd like to open it up now and hear from you all. I'm told we have a little less than 15 minutes, but of course these conversations can continue throughout the day.
I want to thank all the panelists, and I have a question for Neferti, my friend and my sister, and I hear the poet so much in the rant, and I wonder if you would talk about poetics and the kind of knowledge making we need now.
You know, Saidia, I believe so much in the power of poetics, both as a lived practice and a theoretical practice. And I do think that the poiesis, which is the making and the creating, that you glean from ordinary people's lives, are the best that we can be inspired from in our own theoretical gestures. It's one way of, surpassing the limits of the rationality and of our critiques. And I'm not against abstraction because poems are abstract too. But I do feel the exceeding of the languages is all I could come up with, honestly. In these times, it's just like that's all I can come up with, but they still bear all of the emotional knowledge and resonance of familiarity and experience across all of these decades. One more thing I would say is the poetics that you have also been very crucial to, I see in another place, I see it as really a cultural revolution that has been happening, not only in academia, but a broader cultural revolution against which all of these fascist wars are trying to turn back. They're revanchist wars, and it does include the transformation of all of the critical knowledge making that emerged out of these decades in the wake of decolonization, such as yours, that turn to poetics or to turn to the transformation of the very languages in which we speak to do more.
Beautiful.
Hi, this is mostly a question for Professor Zahra Ali. I'm over here. Sorry. I wanted to thank you for gracing us with song and for all of your words. But this is also a question for all of the panelists. You mentioned towards the end of your words something about the logic that is personal and internal to the anti-colonial fascisms that emerged from our own anti-colonial insurgent movements. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can hold the complexities of anti-colonial fascisms without those thoughts getting into the wrong hands and without them being co-opted. I think this is an internal conversation, but I wonder if you have any thoughts for the room.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Do you want to respond? Go ahead. Or do you want to, maybe we'll take like one or two more questions. Yeah, there's someone right here, yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all your wonderful words. I really appreciate it. One of you brought up the fact that we should not abandon academia at this current moment and how it's really important to kind of maintain these spaces within prestigious institutions. But I guess the question I have is, I think we've seen the ways in which so many students, predominantly students of color, predominantly women, have been like kicked out of these institutions, expelled, suspended, and brutalized. And I think we've not really seen the support needed from the academia or from the so-called allies in academia. So I think it's really hard, I think, as a student involved in organizing and in activism, to grapple with the sentiment that we should be investing into these institutions while these institutions are also doing everything in their power to make our lives extremely difficult. So I think when we're seeing, I think, students really putting their lives on the line for this movement, being expelled, being suspended, then being told by faculty that we should be investing in these institutions, I think it's tricky for students to grapple with such contradictory elements. But thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much for everything that we have had the opportunity and privilege to hear today. Thank you all. And I wanted to hear Evren mention very beautifully what the excesses of being together, how much being together is in excess of any kind of critique or idea of co-optation, that so much can happen in being together. And it's so striking to me to think about the roots of transnational feminism, as you so powerfully described in the 90s, and how hard it is to be together now relative to what it was. And so I wondered if you all might be willing to reflect on how you think transnational feminist thinking and what it means to be together now has shifted, and what you see as an opportunity or things that we need to think forward with in thinking about the future of transnational feminism.
Great. Thank you so much for that question. So I'm going to throw it back to the panelists. So we have a question about anti-colonial fascisms. How do we think about that? How do we talk about that without it sort of being co-opted, weaponized? And what do we even mean by that, maybe, right? A question about the contradictions of the academy. How do we inhabit these spaces when they're brutalizing people? And then this question about being together as a kind of core practice of building this alternative. So who would like to respond first?
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's of course easier to say, we need to do that than, when it comes to actually doing it, it is definitely harder. But I think like being as close as possible to the people who are struggling and listening to them. For example, I've noticed that, so I've worked with and on feminist movements in Iraq, and also on the 2019 uprisings, which was the biggest uprising in the recent history of Iraq. A lot of people here struggle to understand why Iraqis don't talk about the US so much. Because it has to always be about that. And that they talk about the everyday, like the violence that they face on the everyday level. And actually sometimes can be, one of the slogans of the uprising was كل الأمريكا كل لإيران. So there was as much anger towards the US and towards Iran, because the armed groups that killed the protesters still kidnap them, still repress them in blood, in really. Really, the state of social movement is really sad. The violence is gruesome, is direct. And these groups are backed by Iranian intelligence. It's true that we need to also say that the tanks and the weapons and the guns were given by America. So it's all at the same time, but I feel like taking seriously the notions, the terms in which people define their oppression, without trying to impose predetermined categories, even when it feels a little bit like against what we think or what we should be thinking. I've seen so many scholars say, oh, but this is not how you should. Even in terms of the Arab uprisings, when you look at the literature on it, it's like, oh, but it's not really revolutionary because it doesn't talk about this, because it doesn't talk about that. So there's this, and maybe that's also what academia is. It's very much about disciplining, naming. So I feel like, I feel analytically what I try to do also as an ethnographer very much, and sometimes someone who's trying to do feminist theory is really trying to let the categories of analysis emerge, and also focus very much on everyday forms of violence, and try to make sense of that.
Great. Would anyone else want to respond to that first question about the anti-colonial fascisms as well? Yeah.
I would also like to. In fact, I think I'm going to connect a couple of the questions. So thank you for all of these questions, by the way. They're so valuable. I think that cooptation is maybe not a framework that serves us. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about, because it assumes that there is an inherent, essential goodness to a concept that cannot be sort of spoken about from all kinds of political positions. I think anti-imperialism is one of them. So maybe if we just let go of the idea that it's just normally good, but then gets co-opted afterwards, and accept that it's just a complicated terrain we're going to have to fight over, then I think we don't have to mourn a co-optation. It's already part of the process. And that gets me back to this question about students. Thank you for bringing that up. And I want to clarify that I think there is something, maybe what I'm asking for is not investing in institutions, but just not surrendering them and giving up on their potentials of what they can be. I think often about, if we have a post-capitalist day someday, what would still be meaningful? And I think learning and teaching would still be meaningful activities. Those are not activities that require a capitalist base. And therefore, this is not the ideal version of them by any means, but I think there are things we can do in those spaces, even having a gathering like this. Every time students have a place to gather, I'm excited about the possibilities of that, despite everything they're trying to turn these spaces into. And I think finally, I guess I will say something about not giving up. I do think that it is a really strange moment where this seems to be as much of a, it's as much about material conditions, resources, extraction, exploitation, as it is about war of positions, ideas, ideologies, war on truth, what things mean. So much so that I don't even know if there is any, whether we were critical of it or otherwise, I'm not sure if even Marx himself today would be able to say there's a base and there's a superstructure. It's so meshed up now. So I think that spaces of knowledge and ideas are maybe more important than ever. That's why one of the reasons I'm not willing to give up on these spaces.
Can I say a couple things? Yes, thank you for that. I also wanted to speak to the student because I think you raise a wonderful point. And at UC Irvine, we're always hoping that students will ask more of us. Can we use the library, can we use this space? Can we use this space? So again, hack the space, ask faculty, because so many faculty want to be there with you and want to offer space, office space, whatever we can do for your organizing and for your effort. So yeah, you don't have to, we all want an alternative university, and if there was one, we'd be there. But in the meantime, outside of the classroom and outside of these kinds of spaces, there are just so few spaces left to gather like this. I mean, that's why we wanted to open a feminist bookstore, right? Mm-hmm. To recreate a kind of collective space for coming together and discovering each other and ourselves and ideas and knowledge. And then to Durba's question, we're waiting for your book for the answer to the question. Oh, it's out! Oh, thank God, okay. Yeah, because I mean, one of the problems obviously is the kind of NGOification of a lot of the transnational movements, even though, of course, those spaces were complicated, not, homogeneous, and lots of people were trying to hack those spaces too and do interesting things. So I'm not sure what the answer is, except keep doing what we're doing and just try and experiment and come together in all the ways we can when possible, and build these affiliations. And I mean, it's not a very interesting answer, but to see each other's struggles as our own and to be with each other. So.
Just quickly on the question about gathering together and becoming together. I mean, I'm hearing Zahra's, the failure of solidarity and the failure of feeling, and that can only be built, when we are in fact, building the, making our becoming and our struggles porous to one another. And I think not just in academia, but in all the circles, the attempts, and this is where poesis is also important, the attempts for us to break with those frames that shape our existence, for us to be able to see each other and know and dream and enable us to know, in our hearts and in our thoughts that no one is the same. No one. Nothing is the same, but that we dream and we struggle with others. They are with us. And you can only do that if you build relations and familiarity, and you read each other and all of these. And I think that is the work that has yet to be really fully done. Many people are doing it, but people are beleaguered and they stay in their own corners. And I feel like one very important task is for us to be able to, for me to mediate who I see, so that they might also see each other because I see them. Mm-hmm. And that is the work of poesis.
That's beautiful, thank you. And just, thank you, Neferti, it's beautiful. And just a final thoughts, I just wanted to add that, building from what Zahra was saying about, theorizing from Iraq and not about it, right? That part of what I think transnational feminism, especially in the West, in the US Academy, there is a pivot that needs to happen, right? Like, we have had to spend a tremendous amount of time resisting US imperialism and really theorizing and explaining, all of that. But I think the danger is in missing the theoretical conceptual innovations coming out of feminist struggles in other parts of the world, right? And so one of the kind of developments of feminist thought in Iran coming out of the Women Life Freedom movement is actually to reject the idea that the Iranian state is anti-colonial at all, and to actually theorize the nation state as a colonial formation, right? This is what it comes from. And to really push us to confront one of the constitutive structural problems of decolonization, which was the embrace of the nation-state form as the horizon of liberation. And the idea that that capitalist development models, when done by the local bourgeoisie, was going to be some kind of alternative. This has failed spectacularly. It has failed economically, politically, ecologically. It has created crises of social reproduction and tremendous forms of gender and sexual violence, right? So, in fact, Iranian feminists are arguing the Islamic Republic is a colonizing force. It's colonizing ethnic minorities within territorial Iran. It's colonizing women's bodies, and it exercises a disastrous regional role. And the situation in Iraq is like so devastating that the Iranian government literally is funding the forces that suppress feminist and popular uprisings in Iran. So if we really care about solidarity, if we want to try to be consistent across all of these spaces, I think we do have to challenge some of these axiomatic terms and concepts that we kind of take for granted, and to reckon with the fact that the crisis is about capitalism. This is a crisis of capitalist development models. And that is where we need to figure out our way out of this. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful attention and solidarity today. Thank you.